It's 2:13 a.m. in a dimly lit co-working space on the east side of San Francisco. A lone developer leans toward a glowing blue window, typing furiously, chasing a bug that refuses to die. Coffee cools beside her. Deadlines close in. Yet her editor stays quiet, fast, almost invisible. And you know that feeling because you've lived inside that same interface for hours, days, years. VS Code becomes the room you work in, the air you breathe, the silent partner you trust. But here's the disruption. Beneath that clean facade lives a rebellion, a clash between empire and insurgency, a corporate giant forced to confront its own history. Microsoft built its reputation on heavy, all-encompassing tools. But this lightweight thing, this strange, deceptively simple editor, ignites a transformation that no one inside Redmond sees coming. And the stakes hit real people. A junior developer in 2024 lands her first job because VS Code's built-in Git tools help her push clean commits. A seed, a startup saves $32,000 a year by standardizing on a free editor that doesn't collapse under pressure. A global, open-source team scattered across Tokyo, Lagos, Berlin, and Sao Paulo avoids collapse because VS Code gives them one shared environment, one language, one rhythm. This isn't just a text editor. It's a negotiation between freedom and control, between open source ideology and corporate power, between the world Microsoft built and the world it needs to survive. Because VS Code doesn't merely disrupt the editor market, it forces Microsoft to reinvent itself from the inside, at the moment the company fears its past the most. And it begins far away from Redmond, in a cramped Berlin apartment, with one engineer and one impossible idea. Because VS Code doesn't merely disrupt the editor market. It forces Microsoft to reinvent itself from the inside, at the moment the company fears its past the most. From a failed internal project in 2011, to a tiny group of engineers ignored by leadership, to the radical decision to open source everything, this is the story of how a lightweight tool carried the heaviest future. And it begins far away from Redmond, in a cramped Berlin apartment, with one engineer and one impossible idea. Chapter 1. Andreas Janssen and the Birth of Monaco. Have you ever wondered what the first line of code looks like in a tool that will rewrite an industry? Not the polished version, not the GitHub commit, but the moment a single engineer stares at a blank screen and decides to challenge the laws everyone else accepts. Because in Berlin, in 2011, a soft-spoken Swedish engineer named Andreas Janssen asked the question no one at Microsoft dares to raise aloud. Can a browser-based editor ever feel truly native? Andreas Janssen, meticulous and introverted, lives inside details. He sketches interfaces on napkins at Turkish cafes off Oranienstrasse. He times keystrokes. He obsesses over latency the way musicians obsess over timing. His belief is simple and dangerous. The future doesn't belong to plugins or desktop monoliths. It belongs to the browser. Inside Microsoft, the winds blow the other direction. Leadership pushes Silverlight, rich clients, heavy frameworks. But Andreas keeps building. He writes an editor entirely in JavaScript, a strange creature for 2011. He names it Monaco. It loads in 240 milliseconds on a 2011 MacBook Air. It compiles in the browser. It feels fast, shockingly fast. 2 months, $120,000 of internal R&D budget. One prototype that no one knows what to do with. Then comes Eric Gamma, the legendary co-author of Design Patterns, a man whose calm authority settles arguments without raising his voice. He sees Andreas's prototype running inside early Azure portal pages. He watches Monaco handle text like a desktop tool, and he realizes something. This basement experiment carries more potential than its creators understand. Yet inside Microsoft, Monaco becomes a tool without a mission. A hidden engine powering small features in Azure, unnoticed, uncelebrated, waiting for a moment that hasn't arrived. But that moment is coming. Because elsewhere inside Redmond, a flagship product is collapsing under its own weight, and that failure is about to open a door no one expects. Chapter 2. The Collapse of Visual Studio Light Switch. For 3 years, Microsoft's most hyped future of business app development hides a truth no one wants to admit. Light Switch is collapsing from the inside. The surprise isn't that it fails. The surprise is how loudly it fails, and how that failure detonates a chain reaction that reshapes Microsoft's entire developer strategy. It's 2012 when Beth Massey, the passionate evangelist who championed Light Switch at conferences across the world, reads the internal memo announcing its end. She built tutorials, coached teams, convinced skeptics. Now the project dies in a single sentence. In Redmond, she closes her laptop and knows the fallout will shake more than one product line. At the same time, S. Somasagar, the veteran Microsoft Developer Division 5P, faces pressure from every direction. Visual Studio, once the crown jewel, now feels like an anchor. Developers complain it's too heavy, too slow, too corporate. New recruits flee to Sublime Text and GitHub's sleek, open-first culture. Then an internal review lands on his desk with a question that slices through the room. Why can't we ship something lightweight? The numbers offer no mercy. Visual Studio takes 42 seconds to launch on a 2013 Lenovo ThinkPad. 42 seconds for an IDE to wake up. In developer time, that's an eternity. In the vacuum left by light switches collapse, teams scramble for answers. Someone mentions Monaco, that browser editor hiding in Azure. A tool built for the web. A tool Microsoft never intended to champion. A tool that defies the company's Windows-first instinct. Suddenly, Monaco isn't a curiosity. It's a candidate. But one problem looms over everything. Monaco lives in the browser, and Microsoft still worships the desktop. That tension is about to erupt in a meeting that will change the company forever. Chapter 3. When web engineers challenged the desktop empire. Remember the moment Monaco stopped being a quiet basement experiment and started becoming a threat? That tension doesn't fade. It sharpens. Because when the light switch collapse creates a vacuum, Microsoft's engineering culture collides with something it never prepared for. A web-first uprising. It's 2014, Building 18. A conference room with humming fluorescent lights and 12 engineers packed around a too-small table. A senior Visual Studio architect slams a hand on the desk and fires the decree that echoes through the room. You can't build a serious editor in JavaScript. The desktop team dominates Microsoft. They build giants. They build monuments. They don't yield. Chris Diaz, charismatic and relentless, leans forward. He believes Monaco can escape the browser. He believes the web can conquer the desktop. And then the door opens. Eric Gamma walks in late, calm as always, settles into a chair, listens for a moment, and cuts the room in half with one sentence. What if we try? The rebellion ignites. A rogue team forms. 6 weeks of sprinting, hacking, refactoring. They wire Monaco into a fragile shell built on Electron 0.20.0, a platform so early it leaks 150 megabytes of memory every hour. But the prototype runs cross-platform fast. The first build weighs just 38 megabytes lighter than any Microsoft developer tool in history. This is heresy! A cross-platform editor built on open web technology threatens decades of Windows-centric strategy. Leadership hesitates. Enterprise customers won't understand. Internal teams fear fragmentation. But hesitation dies on February 26, 2014, when a shockwave erupts from outside Microsoft's walls. Because GitHub is about to release something that changes everything. Chapter 4. GitHub accidentally forces Microsoft's hand. The meeting lasts 11 minutes. When it ends, Microsoft's quiet prototype Monaco, running inside a fragile Electron shell, faces its first existential threat. Because on February 26, 2014, GitHub detonates a bomb in the developer world, and no one in Redmond sees it coming. They call it Atom, the hackable editor for the 21st century. Sleek, modular, entirely web-powered, and it lands with the force of a cultural event. Chris Wanstreth, GitHub's idealistic co-founder, stands in a small office in San Francisco, watching download counters spike. 1 million installs in 9 months. Thousands of packages. A community building features faster than companies can plan them. Inside GitHub, engineer Nate Goldman pushes Atom's modular vision to extremes. Every feature becomes a package. Every package becomes a building block. Developers remix the editor like it's open-source clay, shaping workflows in ways traditional IDEs can't match. And here's the revelation. Atom proves the impossible. A serious editor can run on web technologies. It can be fast. It can be loved. And it can evolve at a speed corporate tools can't match. Atom loads in 1.8 seconds. The vscode prototype loads in roughly 700 milliseconds. Suddenly, the internal debate ends. Microsoft greenlights the project, but quietly. No fanfare, no press, just a small team building a new editor in the shadows. preparing for a decision that will overturn 30 years of Microsoft orthodoxy. Because the next step isn't to build a product, it's to do something unthinkable for a company that once dominated through closed ecosystems. They're about to open source everything. Chapter 5. The day Microsoft open-sourced everything. 91,000. That's the number of GitHub stars Visual Studio Code collects within its first 24 hours of going public. A number so violent, so unexpected, it stuns even the team that pushed the button. But that explosion doesn't happen in a vacuum. It begins on a stage in New York City on November 18th, 2015, when Chris Diaz walks out under the Connect conference lights and delivers a sentence no one in the audience believes at first. Visual Studio Code is open source. Behind that moment stands Satya Nadella, the CEO determined to drag Microsoft out of its defensive past. He champions collaboration, cross-platform tools, and a company that no longer depends on walls to stay powerful. But inside Redmond, not everyone celebrates. Brian Harry, a longtime engineering leader, sits in meetings where fears run wild. Open sourcing an editor threatens intellectual property, business models, even Microsoft's identity. Some executives call it reckless. Others call it surrender. Yet, the decision holds. And when the GitHub repository goes live, 430,000 lines of code suddenly exposed to the world, the reaction is immediate. Developers who once distrusted Microsoft swarm the project. The first community bug fix arrives in 32 minutes. Extensions appear overnight. Issues fill with discussions, arguments, proposals. The fortress dissolves. The collaborators emerge. But every revolution creates friction. And as VS Code opens its doors to the world, a new battleground forms. Not inside Microsoft, but inside the marketplace itself. Because when thousands of developers begin extending the editor, shaping it, bending it, fighting for influence, the community becomes the battlefield. And the war for the extensions is about to begin. Chapter 6. When the community became the battlefield. Don Giaman doesn't look like a revolutionary. Soft-spoken, thoughtful, working late nights in a small apartment in Perth, he uploads a simple VS Code extension in 2016, a Python tool he expects a few hundred people might use. Then the downloads start. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Within months, his quiet side project becomes the most installed extension on the entire marketplace, outpacing Microsoft's own offerings and igniting a conflict the company never anticipated. Inside Redmond, Sean McBreen watches the numbers climb. As Marketplace PM, he fights to keep the ecosystem open, democratic, community-driven. But the stakes escalate fast. Extensions explode from 221 to more than 6,000 in 2 years. Developers build linters, debuggers, themes, language servers. They weaponize customization. They transform VS Code from an editor into a universe. And Microsoft suddenly faces a problem born from its own success. The most essential extension, the Python one, comes from outside the company. Enterprises depend on it. Universities teach with it. The entire data science pipeline leans on it. Yet its sole maintainer is one independent developer, coding after work, fueled by coffee and persistence. So Microsoft makes a radical move. They hire Don Giaman full-time. They bring the community's most important extension in-house while promising not to smother the ecosystem that created it. By 2018, the Python extension hits 10 million installs. The marketplace becomes VS Code's beating heart, and the real power shifts from the editor's core to the extensions wrapped around it. But something new is forming. Something bigger than customization, bigger than plugins, bigger than human-written tools. Because the next transformation won't come from a developer writing an extension. It will come from an AI predicting your next line of code before you even think it. Chapter 7. From Editor to Intelligence Hub. Fast forward to July 2021. A developer types 7 words, function to calculate prime numbers, and pauses for a sip of coffee. Before her hand returns to the keyboard, VS Code completes the thought. Entire function. Clean logic. Working code. It feels impossible. It feels like cheating. And it marks the moment the editor stops being a tool and starts becoming something else. A collaborator. The force behind it is GitHub Copilot, a project shepherded by Oja Damore, the sharp-minded head of GitHub Next, and evangelized by Andre Karpathy, whose early demos ignite a global shockwave. At first, panic spreads. Hackers fear automation. Juniors fear replacement. Veterans fear decline. But adoption accelerates. Curiosity becomes reliance. Reliance becomes transformation. Copilot doesn't appear from nowhere. It stands on a lineage VS Code quietly builds for years. Syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, language servers, extensions. Each layer pushes the editor closer to understanding intention, not just text. Then Copilot detonates the ceiling. GitHub's 2022 study reveals a 55% jump in developer speed. By 2023, nearly half of all new code written inside VS Code comes from AI suggestions, 46%. A number that would have sounded dystopian a decade earlier now becomes reality. Developers don't just code faster, they think differently. They brainstorm with the machine. They test ideas through suggestion loops. They explore unfamiliar languages without fear. The editor evolves into an intelligence hub, anticipating patterns, solving friction, reshaping creation itself. But this shift raises a question too big to ignore. If AI can write code, what does it mean to be a programmer at all? And as the world races to answer, a new battleground forms. One where environments move to the cloud, teams dissolve local setups, and the war for the future of development begins. Chapter 8. The Future. It's early 2024 inside a glass-walled startup loft in Singapore. Rain spits against the windows. A DevOps engineer named Michelle Nguyen watches a progress bar sprint across her screen. 14 minutes. That's all it takes for VS Code dev containers to spin up an entire development environment. Docker services, dependencies, configs, everything a new hire needs on day one. 5 years ago, her team spent days wrestling with mismatched laptops, broken paths, missing libraries. Now the environment arrives, pre-built, precise, identical. And her company saves 9 hours per engineer every onboarding cycle. But across the city, Alex Kim, a sharp-eyed security researcher, examines the same trend with unease. Centralized cloud environments terrify him. One misconfigured container exposes a fleet. One compromised token opens every project. The very thing that accelerates development also concentrates risk. Speed and danger grow together. The battlefield widens fast. VS Code in the browser climbs in usage. JetBrains launches AI-infused IDEs that challenge Microsoft's momentum. Amazon pushes Code Whisperer deeper into enterprise stacks. Everyone fights for the same critical territory, the developer's daily workspace. Because whoever owns the environment doesn't just influence coding. They dictate workflows, shape ecosystems, and steer billions of decisions that determine how software is built. The stakes swell into something enormous. Cloud versus local. AI-driven coding versus human craftsmanship. Open ecosystems versus corporate control. Each choice nudges the future in a different direction, shaping what tools we trust and what skills we rely on. And as these forces collide, the story arcs back toward a single truth. The editor that began as a rebel experiment now stands at the center of a trillion-dollar struggle. The end approaches, but the transformation isn't finished yet. Chapter 9. The editor that rewrote its creators. Have you ever stopped to ask how a tool this small ended up reshaping an entire company, an entire culture, an entire generation of developers? Because when you trace the path back from cloud environments battling for dominance in 2024, from AI copilots writing nearly half our code, you find the story begins in places no one expected. A Berlin apartment. A failed Microsoft project, a rebellion inside Building 18, a quiet open-source repo that exploded overnight. And now the scale is undeniable. In 2025, more than 72% of developers report VS Code as their primary editor. That means students in Lagos writing their first Python script, fintech teams in Sao Paulo deploying microservices, and AI researchers in Toronto training models all operate inside the same shared environment. The editor becomes a universal language, a common ground, a connective tissue. Every second, millions of keystrokes flow through it. Thousands of AI suggestions fire. Entire dev containers launch and collapse in the cloud. The environment becomes dynamic, adaptive, intelligent, shaping work in ways older tools never imagined. But the future stretches even further. AI agents begin writing full modules, not just lines. Cloud-native workspaces eliminate the idea of my machine entirely. Editors anticipate intent, debug autonomously, Refactor proactively. The environment stops being passive. It starts becoming a partner. Yet the fundamental question remains the same. What does it mean to create when your tools start thinking with you? When the boundary between human ingenuity and machine intelligence blurs, VS Code's real legacy isn't speed or convenience. It's perspective. It changed how developers think, how teams collaborate, how software evolves. It redefined creation itself. And it all began with a small team, a risky idea, and the belief that the lightest tool could carry the heaviest future.